Hello my quilting friends! Leah Day here with a new video for the machine quilting party. Today we're quilting Bright Star, one of my favorite designs for walking foot style quilting. It has a super cool effect, have radiating lines coming out in all different directions. So let's jump on the machine and see how this works with walking foot style quilting. So I'm getting started on Bright Star, and I have placed a piece of masking tape through the middle, so it's running diagonally across my quilting space. And I could start dead in the center, and that's the way I stitched it for my Marvelous Mosaic quilt. But I'm kind of feeling like starting this a little off to one side. So this time I'm going to go a little asymmetrical, a little off center, and I think that's going to change the design. It's going to look really cool. So basically just wherever I want to get started, I'm going to pull up my bobbin thread to the surface, that way it doesn't make a mess on the back of the quilt, and I'm going to start stitching. I'm just using that tape as a guide. So the tape is actually underneath my walking foot here, and that way I'm stitching right next to it. The needle is going down into the quilt right next to the tape. And so long as the tape is nice and sticky, it's not going to get gummed up or anything. Nothing's going to happen to your walking foot. And it just, to me, visually provides a really solid line to travel against. You could also run the tape up against the side of your walking foot on either side, too. That would change the spacing of your lines if you were spacing things. Obviously, it would add, for me, an extra 1/2 inch with this walking foot. But that's an idea too. If you don't like the idea of stitching and having your needle rub up right next to the tape, then that's an option too. Now I'm going to kind of cheat. I am going to stitch off the edge of my quilting space, my quilt top, and into the batting. Lift my foot completely, pull it away, and I'm going to clip these thread tails short because I stitched all the way into the batting area. So I know it's nice and secure. It's not going to go anywhere. Now I'm going to rotate around the other way and tie off and bury this thread tail. This is going to be a design that has lots of stops and starts, so keep a cheater needle handy so that way you can just tie off and bury that thread tail really quickly. And I keep my cheater needle on a pin place, so it's right next to my machine. And that cheater needle allows me to pop the thread tails into the top of the needle, pass it through, super quick and easy. As you can see, that took like, what, 10 seconds? Nothing. It's just a habit. It's a habit you can build. And then once you get really quick at it, you don't even think about it. And tying those thread tails in a knot is what secures them together so they're not going to come unraveled. I do need to mark a little line because this is such a seamless join. I need to find my marking pencil and mark a little hash mark where I'm starting, where I want this join to go, because honestly, I think if I went back and looked at it when I take the tape off, I won't be able to see that that's where I stopped and started. Now, you might be wondering why I started in the middle and stitched out like this. What was the purpose? Why didn't I just stitch from edge to edge all the way across? Well, this is on the diagonal, and even on a quilting square, practice sandwich like this, I could see some shifting and wobbliness in my quilt. So rather than stitch all the way across from edge to edge and risk some pleaty, ripply fabric, I decided I'm going to stitch from the center to the outer edges. And that is the type of design that Bright Star is. It is a center fill design. And what that means is you start in the center of whatever you're doing, and then you stitch to the outer edges. And so if you were quilting Bright Star into a bigger quilt, you would start in the center and radiate out to the edges. So you could be starting in the center and stitching, 50, 60 inches all the way to the edges of your quilt. So obviously you would not stitch all the way across the entire surface, because definitely deal with some fabric shifting and pleating doing that. Now let's see if I can lift this tape carefully and be able to use it again. That's always the trick, right? Let's see here. It kind of curled up a little bit on me, but maybe I'll be able to use it. I'm going to take out some pens. And let's see here. Even if it only sticks for 2 lines, I'll be happy. So I want this line to run perpendicular to the first. So I'm just placing it on here. Oop, oop, oop. I got kind of a mess, but if I pull on it gently, maybe it'll maybe it'll work out here. pull it nice and tight and then smooth it out. Yep, yay, I got 2 lines worth at least. There we go. So now I'm gonna pull up on this side of it, right in the center, drop my needle down. This is gonna be a great design for practicing stops and starts. It really is. Pulling that bobbin thread up. You know, it's one of those things, that technique right there, pulling my bobbin thread up to the surface, I'll tell you, that right there got me so stuck when I was a little girl. I can remember being 8, 9 years old when we got our first sewing machine, and just getting the bobbin to come up through the machine was such a challenge. I did not understand that the top thread needed to make a full pass through the bobbin area so it wouldn't rotate the hand wheel long enough, and the top thread would just get stuck down in the bobbin area. Then the whole thing would gag and it would be very frustrating. You know, and I struggled and fought and struggled and fought with it for years, you know, and looking back on it now, it seems so silly, but that was honestly a really revolutionary thing when I finally realized, oh, okay, so the top thread actually rotates through the bobbin area, and it's like a circle down there. Even if the rotary hook is on its side, like with this machine, or it's top loading, it's a circle. And the top thread needs to pass all the way around the circle to go through completely, and then it will come up. You'll tug on that top thread and it'll come up smoothly. So let me just show you here, and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about, what I used to do when I was a little girl. This was before I was quilting, I was just sewing, but you know, the technique is really helpful no matter what. So I would drop the needle down and then I'd bring it up about right there and then tug, 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 and nothing would happen. You know, it was like stuck. You have to make a full rotation to the point where the needle is dropping back down, then tug on it, and it comes up easy because that top thread's made a full rotation through the bobbin area. So a couple other options if you did not want to use tape. You never know. Some people might not like to use masking tape. And, you know, I really want you to understand that there's lots of different ways to mark your quilts. You could probably find a stencil of this design and mark it with a stencil. You could mark it with a ruler and a marking pencil. I'm trying to minimize marking with a marking pencil simply because it's a lot of marks to erase, you know, and I'm wanting some really pretty photos to take of these blocks. So, you know, honestly, sheer laziness. I'm trying to minimize the marks so that way I don't have to sit there and erase them and they won't be in my photos after the entire block is stitched. And I know that's kind of a, you know, not most people are not worried about that kind of thing, but it's something that's on my mind right now. So I'm just being completely honest, like that's what I'm thinking about. And marking with tape leaves no sign that there was ever anything there, you know? And that's really helpful. So that's at least what I'm thinking about as I'm marking and planning this. So one thing you might also be wondering is if you could do more marks and have to stop and reposition the tape less often. And we did some experimenting with this whenever we were working on the log cabin quilt, the first version of it, and we realized that you can actually layer tape and be able to stitch a lot of the lines of Bright Star with like the tape kind of stacked up together. So let me try and show you how to do this. I'm guesstimating here my space between my lines. Let me back up so you can see it. So I'm just kind of estimating, it's about 2 inches or so from this line of stitching to that one. And so coming out on the other end, I've got a pretty good scale over here too. So now I'm going to take my second piece of tape and I'm going to kind of eyeball that same distance right here and tape this one the same way. So there we go. Now this is probably only going to work for this side. It's probably not going to work over here. With this layering technique is going to allow me basically to stitch all of these lines kind of one after the other, and then I'll pull off the tape with each line of quilting that I stitch. So I'm not even going to try and mark the opposite side. I'm just going to focus on this one section right here, kind of 1/4 of the design. So what I'm doing is just figuring out the spacing right here on the edge and making sure that that looks good, and then also lining up so that the edge of the tape is lined up with that center point. So it's looking like I've got 4 lines so far. And here's a 5th line. And here's the cool thing is that you could kind of play with this. You know, if you wanted a little bit more distance between some of the lines, you could kind of tweak that. You could create some special effects. That would be kind of neat. Here's another one. So that's 5 lines. Then here's number 6. And I think we can fit one more kind of right down the middle. It's going to be a little bit wide spacing there, but I think that's okay. I think it's going to look okay. So here we go. One last piece of tape. There we go. That looks good. So now I'm going to drop my needle down, and what I'm doing is I'm starting right in the center. You can see I've got all of this tape stacked up here. What I'm going to do is follow the edge of this outermost line, and that's what I'm going to use as my guide. Then I'll remove the tape, and then the next line will be up. So it will work, and I've done all the work here and taped everything down so that all I have to do is basically break thread, remove a piece of tape, start quilting again. You know, it'll be much quicker and a little bit speedier in the process. So let me see if this is going to work. I think you really have to kind of think about it and consider the stack. And I think stitching each line kind of in this case, it's kind of counterclockwise because I'm stitching, this is like the innermost line first, and then I'm going to remove tape and kind of be working backwards. So I don't know if there's a specific trick to placing the tape this way. It's just kind of something I kind of stumbled across as we were marking the log cabin. So now I'm going to peel off that tape. That reveals the next one. You know, make sure those thread tails are kind of out of my way. I might start stitching just like maybe 1 or 2 stitches away from that center point for this line. That's another cool thing. You don't have to start dead in the center. Sometimes when you start in the exact same place over and over again, it builds up too much thread. So maybe 1 or 2 stitches off, and that's okay. Now I'll stitch on down. So hopefully you can see that this has significantly sped up the process. I'm not stopping, starting, tying off threads. You know, I've sped up a little bit here. And that's okay. I think I will probably stop and tie off all 3 of those thread breaks at once, so that way I don't get too many thread breaks kind of hanging out in the middle of the quilt. I don't want to make a mess. I don't want to risk it getting too sloppy. So now that piece gets removed. And let's see here. This is, I think, the tricky part would be dealing with these thread tails with the tape in place, which means that there's less opportunity to tie these off and bury them. That's why I took off my gloves so I have a little bit more control. And now if these two were stacked up right on top of one another, I would not tie them in a knot together. I only ever tie 2 thread tails in a knot, and that's it. I don't ever add, like try and tie all 4 into a knot, because isocord, that's the thread I'm using, is very slippery. And even if I was using something that wasn't so slippery, that's a pretty big knot. 4 thread tails all together, that would be a pretty big knot to try and tie up and bury in the middle of your quilt. So instead, oops, I grabbed a 3rd one. There we go. Okay, so now I've got 2 thread tails, pop it in the cheater needle, send it through. Now 2 more thread tails, tie them in a knot, and that knot I'm tightening up to only about 1/8 of an inch from the quilt surface. It's not going all the way smack dab right against the quilt surface, or the knot would not pop into the back layer of the quilt, into the middle layer of the quilt. It would stay on the surface and look really nasty. And it would also feel bad too. I hate the feeling of knots on my quilt. Even now I can run my finger over that and I can't feel any knots. It just feels like the quilt, you know? It doesn't feel like there's lots of knots and thread tails there. And just rub back and forth, and the thread ends all take care of themselves. And now I can get started again. So I think that this stacking method for the tape is going to really make brightstar a lot faster to quilt. Oh, forgot my gloves. Now, one thing I would say, that was actually sticky enough. This masking tape is sticky enough that I'm feeling a lot of traction from that, so maybe you don't even need gloves when you mark with it. But I really think that marking and stacking it like this is going to make it faster, and it's certainly going to feel less tedious. I don't know about you, but sometimes, even a simple design with simple straight lines can feel very tedious if it's a constant stop, start, break thread, tie off, that kind of thing. And that can get annoying as well. I like to get into a rhythm or a flow with quilting, and I find that's really important. If I don't feel that flow and that rhythm and kind of a system built in, then it's just not relaxing, I think. And so having the tape set up like this, it sets a repeatable set of steps here, so that way I feel like I can jump in, stitch these lines, knock it out quick, and be moving on to the next design. So here's what it looked like whenever I finished quilting Bright Star using this stacked tape method. So that's it for this video. I hope you learned a lot quilting Bright Star and you're ready to stitch it in your next quilt. Now you can always stitch it in a practice sandwich and create the marvelous mosaic quilt. You can see it here behind me. It's a bright, cheerful quilt and a great sampler of different walking foot quilting designs. Now you can find the quilt pattern for Marvelous Mosaic, so you know how to stitch it, in the book Explore Walking Foot Quilting with Leah Day. You can find this book at leahday.com/walkingfoot. It comes with 30 cool designs to try out, plus 7 fun quilt patterns, and we're going to be making 3 of the patterns from this book this year during the Machine Quilting Party. So please come and check it out, buy a copy, and start quilting along with us. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel on YouTube so you don't miss the next video coming out soon. Until next time, let's go quilt!